if you're a candidate, you're looking at this date on the calendar as we record this with a little bit of, frankly, a scared feeling in the pit of your stomach. If you're a member of the public, you're excited because it means campaign season is finally almost done. But as we record this on Thursday, early voting has begun in many communities throughout the state, including pretty much all the suburban Chicagoland communities. Early voting has officially opened up. It's only at a few locations. It's not at every location just yet. That'll be not for a couple more weeks, but we are in the heat of election season. And so we've got a lot to cover, and I'm glad you're with us to watch with us on this episode of the Smoke-Filled Room. Let me introduce our guests. We have sitting state senator for the 32nd district, former McHenry County board member, small business owner, and a whole bunch of other things. Craig Wilcox is with us again. Craig, good to have you.
Always good to join you. I'm glad that I was able to. Hopefully the lights won't flicker here, which means they're wanting me upstairs for a customer, but I'll try and avoid those. So.
Well, they could be flickering for that, or you could live in the southeast and they could be flickering for Hurricane Helene, which we certainly thoughts and prayers out to everybody in the path of the hurricane. So I guess I'd rather have it that they're flickering because somebody wants to give you some money. So hey, that's not the worst thing. We also have with us Chris Balkema. He is the next state senator for the 53rd district. It is fun to say that. He's a former Grundy County board member, including serving as the chairman for 6 years. Chris, we're glad to have you.
Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here.
And Chris and Jill have been friends of my wife and mine for a long time. So it's really fun to do this podcast with you, Chris. I'm glad you're joining us.
Very excited. Thank you.
Speaking of friends who sometimes I try to pretend isn't a friend or I'm not connected to, Keith Brin, my buddy. Glad to have Keith with us. He has been a successful, a lawyer, a business owner. Right now, he's the chairman of the Lake County Republican Party. He was a circuit court clerk in Lake County for a long time. Keith, glad you're here.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
And of course, as always, we have our political experts from Core Strategies. We've got Chris, we've got Michael, and both of them are ready to go, right?
That's right.
39 more days, Collin.
The question will be, how many times do we say Chris on this episode and see if we confuse Balkema and Jackowiak. We'll see how that goes on the episode. All right, let's start with our first topic. This is a broader topic, but if you live in any tier 1 district in this state, or if you've seen the news, or if you read any of the political blogs, the negative part of the campaign season has begun in earnest, and Democrats are whacking hard on abortion. It's as if their obsession with sex and abortion couldn't be any bigger, and clearly you can see it. It definitely, I guess, could be bigger. But in every campaign, you see this in all the top races. I'm looking at a mailer sent against McLaughlin, one against Haas. You've got one against Schmidt. There's one here against Kevin, one here against Bishop. They're all over the place. And of course there's digital ads, there's texting, and in everything it's abortion. And sometimes it's IVF or, women's rights, but it's pretty much abortion all the time. So my question to the panel is it going to work? Every poll we've seen for the last few years in the state of Illinois, let alone national, has abortion pretty far down in the issues that voters care about. In our latest poll, only 4% of Illinois voters listed it as their top issue. When you look at the 2020 election season, female turnout was down, not up. You saw the same thing in 2022. So the Democrats have been running on this issue of abortion, and everyone says, hey, they've been winning, so clearly it's been working. But ad hoc, ergo propter hoc, just because one thing follows another doesn't mean it was caused by the first thing. My question to you all is, has it worked? Is it working? Will it work in November? Anybody feel free to share your thoughts.
I think it's kind of like a little bit of a Hail Mary approach because like we've talked about in previous weeks, you ask Illinoisans what issues are most important to them. Abortion isn't really registering high on that list. People are more concerned about things like the economy and cost of living, immigration, issues like that. And the Democrats, don't really have the answers on those issues. So I think they're trying to force abortion on people, try to get it up higher on the list by just talking about it constantly and hoping that maybe it'll stick.
Listen, you're not wrong. And the top issues that matter to the voters, Democrats do not have a good record, especially not in this state. So it could just be running from issues they don't have a record on. Though that doesn't seem to be the MO of Democrats in Illinois. They tend to just lie about it. Oh, we've lowered your taxes. We've lowered your cost of living, even though it's not true. So you might be partially right there, but I think Democrats, at least in Illinois, have no shame. They'll talk about it even if they don't have a record on it.
I mean, I've seen like on Katie Stewart's literature, you know, she tries to highlight, you know, the grocery tax and some of those things, but she's not leading with it. You know, it's not, you know, her leading issue. It's abortion first, and then, you know, maybe they put a one-liner in there about making ends meet or things don't add up, you know, but it's like, it's an afterthought.
Yep. Yeah, you're not wrong.
So is their intent really to try and set this as a priority to drive turnout or drive a wedge? Or, as I've seen, most of their negative mailers is really just attempting to put a smear on the other person to create any little bit of doubt in the name. So I'm not sure their attack mail has ever followed the critical issues. It's purely about trying to, you know, rub the opponent's name with something that dissatisfies or distasteful to the voter.
Yeah, I mean, their goal here is to prove that their opponent is an extremist. That is absolutely the goal. And Craig, I know you and I have vented about this to each other in the past, just how Democrats are very good at this and Republicans typically aren't, where they're using the issue to prove a bigger point. And in this case, you know, they've chosen the issue of abortion to try to paint Republicans as extremists. But if you look at their digital ads, it's not just abortion. They're running ads in some of these districts on guns too. Obviously, they brought up IVF. Access to women's health care. Obviously, you know, they're doing the usual things like rape kits and, you know, all the stuff they typically run against every Republican who votes against the budget. So it's all part of a larger strategy. And on that, Craig, you're absolutely right.
Look, this is what I've said about the abortion issue for a while now, is that the Democrats are going to keep using it until it stops working. And the fact of the matter is that if and when the House Republicans lose any seats this cycle, it isn't necessarily just going to be because of abortion. It's going to be because these are suburban districts that are in play for a million different reasons, and the Republican Party just didn't have a chance this cycle. It's Trump on the ballot and a money disparity and bad campaigning on one side or the other. That's how I think this is going to play out. Now, that being said, there is an argument to be made on the other end that even though abortion might find itself lower on the list of priorities for voter, there may be a discrepancy between what voters say they care about most when going to the ballot box and what they're actually going to vote for. If you ask a voter, perhaps, what do you care? What are you worried about right now? Well, I'm worried about the economy. The economy's pretty rough right now. That's what they said to you in the polling. But when they get to the ballot box after they see mailer after mailer after mailer and they get really concerned about, well, this other guy, he's not pro-choice and I'm really pro-choice, I'm going to vote for the other guy. They might have really cared about the economy. They might have been really concerned about the state of the economy, but they might not liked the Republican based on the abortion issue. Now, I'm not saying I necessarily believe in that, but I am saying that is an argument one could make of if abortion is coming through at the ballot box, if voters are truly voting because of abortion, it's not that the polling is wrong. It's just that voters might genuinely care about the economy. They just don't trust the Republicans because of the abortion issue. That's an argument that can be made.
It's a lot of might and maybe in your argument. I appreciate that you're giving the other side of the argument, Chris, and obviously we want to hear that, but it's a lot of might and maybe. I mean, if people cared about it that much, I mean, we've done focus groups, we've done polling, you've got candidates out door knocking with swing voters. It isn't resonating. It isn't out there. I mean, I think Craig's on it, that it's part of a larger strategy, but as issues go, it would have showed up at some point. The mights, the maybes, maybe they're just not telling us they care about it until they vote. It's hard to believe in that when the facts don't back it up and the data doesn't back it up.
Well, we'll see it on election. If we could do some exit polling, that'd be interesting to see what really drove people to the polls and maybe move their votes away from the Republican Party. But I mean, we've also brought up the point earlier that the abortion messaging it's just another cog in the Republicans are weird, Republicans are out of touch, Republicans are extreme messaging. If we are to believe that is working to some extent, then abortion is certainly part of it.
Okay.
Well, and I think this resonates with a suburban environment. Obviously, the suburbs are in play, and the Democrats want to capitalize on things. And I live in an area in Lake County that isn't especially prone to taking advantage, I think, of abortion services. yet they are terrified something's going to get taken away from them. Even though if you look at the state of Illinois, we would have to have massive changes in government to change any laws in Illinois. So it's really not in play, but it's about politics of fear. And I think Senator Wilcox identified it pretty spot on, is that this is just yet another opportunity to create that monster that is the Republican Party, to drive that wedge into suburban voters, to get them away from voting for anything Republican, because it's just too much. And abortion has worked in the past. And quite frankly, they keep beating that drum. And if you're just going to keep beating that drum and it's working and the politics of fear is going to work, if I were them, I would do the same thing.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
I agree with Keith and Senator Wilcox. I come from, a different angle. The 53rd district, as you all know, is very conservative. So pro-life is a priority for a lot of the district, and it fits my DNA very well because I'm very much pro-life. But the fear tactic, I believe, is spot on, that if we just laid out the facts and the data of abortion, and is it really going to go away in Illinois? No, and not anytime soon, unfortunately, from my perspective. But the facts and the data, I think, if they were just viewed, it would be kind of a moot point. But the emotional piece, and it strikes a chord in all of us. All of us are wired with a conversation like that, positive or negative. A positive mailer or a negative hit piece strikes a chord of emotion very high on the feeling wheel, for those of you that know the feeling wheel. And so it's a recipe that continues to get used for good, bad, and the ugly.
Well, and to our candidates or campaign staffers who are watching this, one thing that our polling has shown through our subscription platform, Empower to Win, we did polling on abortion a few months ago and got some great data on it. And one thing that it showed is it does work to paint you as an extremist if you don't have any response. And now we're not saying to talk about abortion in your race. We are saying understand what's being done. They're painting you as an extremist. And if you have no response to that, voters are going to believe it. Doesn't mean you need to talk about abortion. In some districts, it may make sense. But what it does mean is if you just completely let them paint you as an extremist and you just focus on, it's the economy, which it is, don't get me wrong, but you're robotic and you don't really show that you've got some passion, that you care, that you're not crazy, that you're personal. You have to have some level of response, even if it's just using photos of you with kids and families and showing that you care, that you're a real human. Like, don't let the other side dehumanize you, because that's part of the strategy here. You don't have to talk about abortion, but you have to have some level of a response, meaning don't just let your opponent paint you as an extremist. Otherwise, you will lose, even if you are talking about the issues voters care about, which is cost of living and cost of living related issues. All right.
Colin, I have one final point.
Close us off on this, Chris. Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to add, I saw that the Illinois Right to Life came out with their candidate scores after their survey they put out there. And I found it so interesting. And honestly, this isn't a bad political strategy from the House Republicans, but I found it so interesting that so many House Republicans just skipped the survey entirely. Like, that just shows you more than anything how irrelevant, like, the Right to Life organizations have become in the state from a political perspective, because the Republican Party, they have become such a detriment to the Republican Party that they don't even want to do their survey anymore. I just found that very interesting.
Well, listen, we've all had to live through survey season, and you've got Keith, Chris, and Craig who've run for office in the past. Survey season, questionnaire season is the worst. You get a bunch of them. So any excuse you have to not have to fill at least one of them out, you'll take. But the general rule with, do I fill this questionnaire out or do I not, is what's the value proposition? What am I getting in exchange for what I might be giving up? In the case of these Right to Life questionnaires, you're obviously giving fodder to your opponent. So you got to know, am I getting anything back for this? And there was a time when these Right to Life organizations, when IFI, IFA, and some of those groups were so good at turning out churches and turning out conservative voters and religious voters for Republicans and for conservatives, that it was worth any sort of negative that you might get from filling out that survey. I can tell you, unfortunately, in the last decade, these organizations haven't been as good at voter mobilization. So I don't know if I blame some of these candidates for saying, listen, I'm not getting a lot for filling this out, so why should I take the negative? Personally, I still like candidates who say where they stand and they don't shy away from it. So, I personally prefer candidates that got the backbone to say, screw it, here's where I stand. You want to fight me, fight me. But I do understand the strategic thought that goes behind it. And again, if they're not getting much for filling out the survey, why would they do that? And that's probably the equation that they went through in their heads. All right, let's go to the next topic here. Speaking of surveys and organizations, special interest organizations. In the last week, the Gun Violence Prevention PAC, or GPAC, their Illinois entity, has announced which candidates they're endorsing, which races they're going to get involved with. They're claiming they're going to spend a bunch of money. We'll see. But there's a number of candidates on this list, and I think it's worth talking about. Plus, it kind of gives us an excuse if anybody on the podcast has some opinions on some of these races, gives them a chance to talk about the races. So let's bring it up here. They're really keying on 5 races that they want to point to, targeting Amy Grant with Jackie Williamson, targeting Marty McLaughlin with Maria Peterson, targeting Kevin Schmidt with Latoya Greenwood, and then in open seats, backing Marty Duder, who is running against Dennis Rebelletti in 45, and then Murray Briel, or Amy Murray Briel, depending on who you ask, who's running against Liz Bishop in 76. Those are the 5 races they're really keying on. There's other candidates that they have and have not endorsed that we can talk about, but first, I just want to stop there. Any thoughts on those 5 races and GPAC's involvement? I mean, in some cases, it might be a positive, but this is an anti-gun organization, and I can think of at least one of these districts that isn't hugely anti-gun. So curious what you guys think.
So I think that the 2 that stick out to me are Schmidt and the former Lansing Ednock seat for Amy Murray Briel. For Schmidt, half the district's going to be pro-gun, half the district's going to be anti-gun, so it's kind of going to balance out there, going to cancel each other out. But the interesting one was House District 76. I mean, Ednock was pretty pro-gun during his time in the state legislature, and the fact that they're going all in on Briel here is just, it doesn't really make sense to me. It's a district where they're probably can be confident enough that where they can get involved in this district, and even if it does bring Briel down a little bit, they're probably still going to win the district either way. But that's a district that if I were the House Democrats, I might have said, hey, maybe don't go into this one. But if you're confident in that district, you can afford to bring in the gun control people when you're up like 10
when it comes to guns, you got to be targeted. The rule is on that issue, both sides know you've got to be targeted in your efforts when it comes to guns. In both districts you mentioned, Chris, I mean, 76, the southern portion of that district is not super anti-gun. You look at the Schmidt district, Michael can tell us better than anybody that at least half that district is an anti-gun. I mean, these are issues you got to be way more targeted with, rifle versus shotgun, pun intended here on this topic. And I think if I'm in either of those campaigns, I'm going to find a way to use this to my advantage. If you're smart, if you're strategic, maybe you have an outside PAC mail every hard Democrat in that district saying, or every pro-gun voter in that district saying, hey, guess what? Especially if you're a pro-gun swing voter, have that mailer go out like 7 days or 5 days before election day as a reminder. It wouldn't be the worst thing.
Collin, can you remind me, because none of those numbers sounded like the south and west sides of Chicago. Is the anti-gun violence PAC very active in the south and west sides of Chicago? Do they do 80-90% of their focus where 80-90% of the gun violence is?
No, because their goal is not necessarily to actually reduce crime and gun violence. It's just to win campaigns.
Gotcha. Yeah,
well, I was
kind of ironic.
I thought that the whole gun narrative had changed recently because I hear Kamala Harris state specifically that she and Tim both have guns. So I thought all the rules had changed.
Yeah, if you've got to win Pennsylvania, you can't be anti-gun or anti-fracking. So as we've all learned with Kamala Harris, her opinion can change with the wind if a pollster tells her. So
yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Good point, Chris. Again, I wish this was like that around the horn where I could give points because both of you that was awesome. Anybody else have thoughts on this? So, Michael, tell us about the Schmidt race. I mean, that's not the full district there is not anti-gun. Maybe in some pockets, but that whole district is not anti-gun.
Yeah, I would say there are probably some pockets here where, that message might work. If they're super targeted with it, they might be able to move the needle a little bit. But I think, overall, this is a pretty pro Second Amendment district. I mean, you've got towns like Millstadt and Freeburg where, everybody has a firearm. And then you think of even in towns like East St. Louis, I mean, a lot of the people that live there have firearms as well because, they understand how important it is to be able to protect themselves with all of the violence and drug activity and things that, go on in that part of the county. So I think it's similar to, the abortion messaging and the Second Amendment and the gun control messaging. That's a tough needle to thread in this district because if, people in certain communities in the 114th get wind of, each candidate's position on these issues, it could have a negative impact for them as well as a positive impact.
And Michael, you and I have seen it on the digital spends, on the mailings, on their advertising. They're using abortion and guns not in a targeted fashion. They're using it broadly across every race in the entire district, which is where, again, I think they're creating some liability for themselves, because in some districts, maybe up by Keith, yeah, the whole district, you can talk about abortion and guns, and that's just fine. But a lot of these targeted districts, there's a reason why they're targeted. They're not deep blue. And I think some of these smaller mistakes, Democrats have all the money in the world, so they're just blowing it and spending it. But sometimes you got to pull back and be a little more strategic. And I think some of these mistakes, maybe it won't hurt them. Maybe, as Chris said, they're going to win by so much, a couple points won't kill them. But some of these races might be so close that 1 or 2 points could make the difference.
Well, and I live in the 114th, and I'm seeing LaToya Greenwood's ads every time I open up my phone on Facebook, and it's a lot of abortion, messaging. Obviously, that's not a message.
Michael, you're not the targeted audience for that?
You wouldn't think that I would be the target audience for that. And I sent a screenshot, I think, yesterday of some of the comments in our Discord on one of those ads that LaToya was running, and 90% of the comments were negative. So they're not spending their money wisely. They're doing this blanket approach, and they're getting a lot of Republicans pretty riled up, as you saw in those comments, and maybe Lane can put it up or something if he wants to. But yeah, they weren't getting what they expected on that.
But Lane, how do you like that? Our political experts are so comfortable now that even they pass you work. I thought I could do that. Okay, so 3 of the races that they've endorsed, but they haven't spent in. I just think this is a little bit interesting. Again, Chris likes to tell everybody I read too much into stuff, but sometimes I pick up on nuggets. It's not always tinfoil hat land. There's 3 districts where they've endorsed, but they're not spending a lot of money. That's 97, Shanahan against Benton, 112, Katie Stewart, Jay Keevan, and then 51, where Tausi Uferdike is challenging Nabila Saeed. Those 3 districts they've endorsed, but they don't have it as high priorities for them to spend money in. You might say, one of them maybe is because it's not as much in play. One of them because it's more conservative and they know better than to spend in it. But I don't know. Those 3 races just seemed interesting to me, that they're high priority races. They're tier 1 races, and yet GPAC's endorsed, but they're not supposedly not spending a lot of money in those districts. Could just be me reading into it, but I'm curious if anybody else has thoughts.
I think each district has perhaps reasons why they're doing it. It seems like the 112th district idea should be applied to 114th as well. They're probably saying that the guns aren't going to play as well in 112 as they would in 114, but that even still, like, they're right next to each other, so I don't know how you could say that. 97, you have some rural areas, so maybe they're just not doing it. Maybe they're just overconfident in 97. I've been bullish on 97 this entire cycle, and anybody can quote me on that. And same thing with 51. It's like maybe they're just really bullish on 51. They'd rather spend Nabila Saeed has so much money that they probably don't even need to spend any money there, that they feel that they're confident. That would be my reading. I don't think you're reading too much into this one, Collin, actually. Wow. I think there is strategy behind why they're not spending in those districts.
Yeah, I mean, 112 is definitely a little bit more conservative than its neighboring district in terms of just based on issue profiles. But like you said, I mean, I think if it's good for one, it's got to be good for the other. I think I think they see Nabila's money and they're like, you got this. We don't need to waste our money on your race. Though I don't think they got it as much as they think they got it, but we'll see. And 97, I mean, they have been very cocky about, where they feel they stand in 97, and Republicans are spending a ton of money in 97. In my opinion, too much. They should be spending it in higher targeted races, but that's just my personal opinion. But if Benton knows what the hell he's doing, he's begging them not to come in that district, because I don't think guns are a big negative in that district. So there's certainly something going on behind the scenes. All right, last thing on this topic before we move to the next one. I found it interesting. I looked through the list of candidates that they endorsed, and I compared it to the list of targeted races by both Democrats and Republicans. And there are 5 races that are targeted by either Republicans, Democrats, or both that are not on the endorsement list. And I found this interesting. 104, Schweitzer against Clem is not on their list. They're not endorsing Clem. 79, Jackie Haas against Billy Morgan. They're not endorsing Billy Morgan. 82, Nicole Laha against Susan Akras. I probably said it wrong. They're not endorsing in that race. 48, Sanalitro against Vesey, not endorsing there. And they're not endorsing in 91, Anderson against Chung. 5 races that they probably could have made an endorsement in, because the Democrats in those races are all pretty liberal, but they chose not to. Interesting. Anybody have thoughts why?
I think on that Schweitzer one, I mean, I think if they would have gotten involved there and endorsed his opponent, I think that would have been a very big negative. I mean, it's a pretty rural district. It was represented by Mike
for sure.
Marin.
Yeah.
Like that, it wouldn't make sense for them to endorse there, especially because the Democrat that is running is kind of trying to play off as, hey, I'm moderate, blue collar, like fighting for you kind of thing. So I don't think he wants that endorsement. If I was him, I wouldn't.
Yeah, that was
probably not wrong.
That was my impression too. You have 3 districts there where guns are just not going to play. That's 91, 104, and 79. Those are all more pro-gun areas, and 82 and 48 are just districts where the House Dems aren't really playing into at all anyway. Like, because nobody's coming to save Akros, nobody's coming to save who's ever running against San Alitro. So that's probably just like, hey, we're not playing in here. You guys shouldn't either. That's how I think those two are going.
Yeah, and Republicans are spending too much on a couple races, and 91 is one of those. Desi Anderson's a wonderful human, but we're not beating Sharon Chung in that race. So, I think we're kind of getting played a little bit too in that we're spending money where we probably shouldn't when our money's limited. But here's the thing I thought of. Again, I always like to find the opportunity for Republicans. 2 of those districts are in play, and there's a path here. In 104 against Clem and in 79 against Morgan, if I was in either of those races, I would have an outside group put out some mailers to hard Democrats and say, hey, the Gun Violence Prevention Pact has refused to endorse Jarrett Clem, has refused to endorse Billy Morgan. Let the hard Democrats, let the liberals in those districts know that the Democratic candidates did not get the pro-gun control endorsement. These are the kind of guerrilla tactics we have got to be doing if we're going to win in some of these districts. And so you got to look at these as opportunities. And I think in both those districts, there is an opportunity here to at least cause the Democrats some problem, because bare minimum, you say, hey, call so-and-so and ask, why weren't you endorsed? Where do you stand on guns? Like, create some problems for them, create some controversy in the final few weeks of the election, force them to have to speak about an issue that they don't want to speak about. That's the kind of guerrilla warfare we got to be doing if we're going to win elections in Illinois. And so if your candidate's in a race where maybe you're looking at that endorsement list too, and you see your Democratic opponent wasn't endorsed, find a way to use it to your advantage. All right, let's go to the next topic. Last catch-all here on campaigns before we get into some specifics. AFP Illinois has ramped up their campaign activity. We've actually talked about it on a few episodes in the last few weeks. It's finally getting picked up by some of those political blogs out there where they're finally noticing. But AFP's coming in and spending some good money on some races. And I'd ask you, Chris, I know you won for a lot of reasons in your primary, but one of those many factors was AFP came in and was very helpful in your race. I think you could speak to that. This could be a factor for some of these races they're getting involved in. They do tend to help move the needle a little bit.
Yes, grassroots for sure, all the way down to door knocking and connections. And obviously the way the organization is set up, the candidate is not a part of that. So it's a good organization that it has become pretty targeted in their races. And so they use obviously data to decide where they're going to get involved. And I was honored to have them with us, but it can definitely be a game changer.
Yeah, just so everybody has it, the list of candidates that they're spending on. And what I love, to your point, Chris, is they're spending it on door knockers, they're spending it on grassroots activity. Lots of groups out there spending things on mail and digital, and you need those things, don't get me wrong, and ads. But you need a ground game to go along with the air game. And so I love that AFP's focused on the ground game, because that's where in some of these districts we're maybe not as strong as we'd like to be. But there's 7 races they're specifically focused on. I'm just going to list the candidate names so I don't keep throwing numbers at everybody so much. But you've got Kevin Schmidt's race, Marty McLaughlin's race, Amy Grant's race, Nicole Laha, Gabby Shanahan, Desi Anderson, and Liz Bishop. Those are the 7 that it seems they're the most focused on, though they are running digital for Schweitzer, they're running digital for Haas, and they're actually running digital for Amy Elick, too. So those are the races, the districts that they've been looking at. Anybody have any thoughts on either those districts or just the strategy in general?
I think it definitely makes a difference, and we've seen it time and time again when AFP gets involved in a race like this, that it moves the needle. And they've had a lot of victories in this state. Balkema being one of them. So it's good to see, and they're very strategic about which ones they get involved in. So I'm happy about it.
To that point about them being strategic, again, I always look at who's not on the list. there's 4 candidates, 4 targeted races that don't show up in this list, and I don't see any digital ads being spent on their behalf. The 45th district, Rebel Eddy against Duder, which we've talked about a lot, including on last week's episode. That's frankly, by the numbers, our number 1 pickup opportunity in Illinois, and they're not spending there. My question is why? 51, again, by the numbers. I know the factors of the race are certainly going to come into play, but based on the data of the district itself, is one of our top pickup opportunities in 51 against Saeed. They're not spending in 112 against Katie Stewart. They're not spending in 66 against Suzanne Ness. Those 4 races are pretty decently high on the list. Like frankly, 1, 2, 3, 5, or 6. I mean, these are high priority races for Republicans to win, and AFP's not spending on those races. So it leads me to wonder why. Curious if anybody has thoughts.
I can only speak for, my perspective is there was an interview process that the candidate goes through. And I would say it was very thorough. And then, of course, they take the results and go off and make their own decision, outside of the candidate and whether they're going to get involved or not. So just speaking from experience of going through the process, they do apply a lot of effort up front to decide who they're going to back and based on output from the candidate.
Okay. And they definitely, something to be said for, they do tend to look for more conservative candidates. Obviously, in these suburban races, I don't know if this is the case in 112, but in 51 and 45, you do have more, I know Rebel Eddy likes to say moderate. I like to say mainstream, but either way, you've got more mainstream candidates who maybe aren't going to be as conservative as an AFP might not like. So maybe that's why they're not playing in 45 and 51 specifically. I don't know.
The counter argument is even a mainstream conservative is more conservative than the sitting Democrat. So it becomes a question, were they overly focused on the qualities of the candidate and not the numbers? So maybe they weren't as strategic in the sense of looking for the best opportunities, or maybe they really have a motto and it is the candidate or not. And if you don't qualify, then you're left off regardless of how it might play out in the seat.
Yeah, AFP does not make an endorsement list without working with the party. Let's be clear here. AFP's leader is his wife's the fundraiser for the Republican Party. He's been very involved with the Republican Party. I'm not, looking to call him out or cause any negatives here. I'm simply making the point that, this isn't just done in a bubble. There's strategy here as to what's being done. And that's a little bit what concerns me, to be honest. Because 45 on paper, even though it's suburban, even though Trump does kill us in 45 a little bit, it's a great pickup opportunity for us. But there's a lot of people who've been concerned about that race specifically because you see money being wasted in some districts that we're not going to win. Desi Anderson's awesome, but we're not going to win that. Gabby Shanahan has a bright future in Republican politics, but we're probably not winning that race. Those resources could be going in to help Rebel Eddy in that race. They could be going in to help Tossie in 51. HRO's pretty much dumped Tossie in 51. And on paper, that's a pretty Republican district. That's the question I have here too is, how much input has the Republican Party had here to say, don't put it into 51, 45, or 112? I'll be honest, Michael, I don't want to speak for you, but I've been constantly frustrated by how much McCombie and the Republicans have played down 112 and saying, I don't know, maybe we won't win that one. Maybe it's not in play. Katie Stewart is incredibly vulnerable, and we should say that and go 100% against her to beat her. And I don't know why we're equivocating. I'm a little bit nervous that these names that are missing from this list are missing for that reason, and I don't love that.
Well, I think part of it may be too like a bandwidth issue. Like obviously, they've got money allocated to spend this cycle in this state. You don't want to spread yourself too thin. And I've talked to people, from AFP over the years, and one of the determining factors on involvement is, how many bodies do we think we're going to be able to get in this region to knock doors and do those kind of things. They've got people working, knocking doors for Amy Alec and Kevin Schmidt. If you add the 112th on top of that, that's 3 races and a 2-county radius.
Yeah, you're not wrong, but then why are we knocking for Amy Alec? I love Amy, but why are we knocking for Amy? She's not even a targeted race. You're right. We have limited resources, but on this list is we're knocking against Shung, we're knocking against Benton. Those are not, if we're winning those districts, we're winning 10, 15 districts around the state. It is a division of resources, but we're spending on some of the races that are lower on that priority list.
Yeah, Collin, you had mentioned that they're working with Marty in 52. That's great. Tossie's next door in 51. So one of them is a let's keep it. The other one is a pickup opportunity, and a readily available pickup opportunity. I don't know why there's bleed over. It doesn't even matter why, if they're not even vested totally in Tossie's race, it bleeds over to 52 where they are working. The borders, as we all know, are drawn like a drunk person with a crayon was drawing these borders. So there's bleed over in all of them. Why not work in both?
Yeah. Yeah, my thoughts. Again, I don't want to get anybody in trouble. I'm usually the one in trouble anyway, so it's fine. I'm used to it. As just one additional thing, AFP's been spending a good amount of money in the McGraw race in IL 17. We've talked about that in previous podcasts. We don't have to talk about it a lot here because we'll talk about that race next. But I'll simply point to, I love that AFP's playing in IL 17 as well through their federal pack. Again, great pickup opportunity for us, and they're spending a good amount of money in that race too. So again, close the loop here, which is we have repeatedly on these podcasts given kudos to AFP, especially AFP Illinois. I'll do it again. We've questioned some of the races they're playing in, but frankly, it's less about them and more about I'm just concerned who's telling them where to play and not to play. But kudos to AFP and thank you to them for playing. We certainly could use their activity and their resources, and they've done a great job over the years making a difference. Let's talk about IL 17 because, well, we got to talk about it. We're going to talk about a few specific races here. So in the last week, we've seen a brand new TV ad by Eric Sorensen trying to accomplish two things. One, to whack Joe McGraw on his strongest campaign theme, which is that he's tough on crime. And two, to paint him as weird, which is sort of that Democratic play to paint Republicans as weird. And so they're running a TV ad right now where they say, I'll paraphrase, but a teacher guilty of child pornography. Illinois says you're supposed to give him 6 years. Joe McGraw didn't give him any jail time. And then they go to like this judge reenactment and they go to a clip from McGraw where he says, I take a file folder, I'll go back in chambers, I put it on the floor, I lay on top of it, and I pray and I pray and I pray until God tells me what to do. Again, I'm paraphrasing. And then I go and make my ruling. It's, again, a strategy to try to make McGraw look weird. Because even if you agree with prayer, which my faith is important to me, Chris, I know yours is as well. I don't want to speak for the rest. I'm not as close to you guys. But even those of us whose faith is important to us, it's a little bit weird. I'm not going to lie. Like a judge going back, laying on top of the folder to pray about what they should do. You could just say, hey, I ask God for guidance. I also look at the facts. I also think about what should be done, and then I make a ruling. It was not a great clip from McGraw, and it does come across a little odd, which is what the Sorensen campaign is trying to accomplish. And so it's clearly a specific strategy here, and I want to open it up. Do you guys think I'm crazy? Do you think it's maybe not as weird as I think it is? Maybe it's just me. I don't know. What do you guys think?
My understanding on it's probably splitting hairs and doesn't really matter, but on the like conviction for the teacher that they mentioned in this ad, that the prosecutors had worked out a plea deal, and McGraw accepted that deal. They tried doing something very similar when Judy Cates ran against David Overstreet. And that ad, ultimately wasn't very effective. But obviously the part where they're trying to...
But proof of something that we've been saying for a long time, which is, and they do this even in judicial races, like you said, with Overstreet. Well, Democrats will do anything. They will say anything, including, as you said, this is a flimsy issue that, again, it was a plea deal. You're 100% correct. It was a plea deal. This was not him ruling or giving a sentence, but Democrats will twist any small thing if it plays into their narrative, and they are shameless when they do it. I'm not saying we got to be as shameless as them, but we do got to kind of fight fire with fire a little bit. And we tend to be too afraid to do that. Sorry, Michael, you hit on a nerve for me. I had to say that.
No, well, obviously, the Democrats must have seen polling that McGraw's, tough on crime message is resonating with people and it's worked. And, they're trying to, like you had alluded to, Collin, trying to poke a hole in that. And then they're also trying to use this kind of like Republicans are weird messaging, like the Harris and Walz campaign attempted. But, they've kind of stopped doing that for the most part on the national level, on the presidential race. So maybe it's not as effective as what they had originally thought.
I can't give specifics because I'm under an NDA on this polling for a couple of clients, but I can simply say I have seen polling on the weird issue, and there's a reason why Harris and Walz have stopped because it ain't working. That's all I can really say on it. But I'm happy that Sorensen's trying the strategy because it's not working nationally, which is why they've stopped. But it isn't to say that it's not going to make a few people go, seriously? He said that? And by the way, he said it in June this year. It's not like they dug up a quote from an event he went to 20 years ago. He said this during the campaign at a campaign stop. Like, and that's just poor training, poor handling, poor prep. Like, your candidate doesn't say that in the middle of a general election campaign. It's an unforced error at bare minimum.
Yeah, I could see if it was like during the primary, he was going to like evangelical church and that was what his goal was, to like portray that type of person as a man of God and those sorts of things. But the problem is like, this is a lesson for all you candidates out there, is like, no matter where you go and what you say, it can be dug up. So you have to, before you go to any event, it doesn't matter who your audience is, always you have to play to your audience, you have to play to your strengths in any given audience, but always know whatever you say is like a court of law. Anything you can't say can and will be used against you. So it's not necessarily like you can portray the message, I'm a man of God, and that affects me in my rulings and everything like that. But this was just strange. I don't know what he was trying to convey here. I think he was going a little bit over the top. This was a mistake on McGraw's part. This could have been portrayed better. It's a good move for the Democrats, which is sad because, 17 is in play. I think everybody here agrees 17 can be in play. And this is an unforced error you really can't afford when you're trying to eat away at the margins and eke out a victory in 17 of the cycle.
Chris, you were trying to jump in, Balkema. I don't know if maybe someone already said it, but if you want to jump in, feel free.
No, it's again a very, as we covered, abortion and the gun. Its prayer can be very near and dear to the heart and tugging at the heartstrings. And so whether somebody, whatever side of the fence they're on that, again, it's a very big emotional appeal. I think what I was saying before was Michael was talking about, the in this case, the Democrats reviewed the polling data and decided that they ought to go after it. I thought maybe they prayed about it and prayed over the polling data and then maybe felt like that was the answer. They should really go after it. I don't know.
More points for Balkema. Well played. Again, in the 17th, let's be real. It's a working class district. It's got a pretty solid Catholic population. That's not a district where prayer as an issue plays. The issue here isn't that, prayer itself was going to hurt McGraw. Again, as Chris said, if he just worded it better, just said, hey, listen, I seek God's guidance, I think no one in that district or anywhere would be like, okay, I got a problem with that. It was just the whole, I lay on top. It just, again, it gets weird. And in an election season, sometimes the littlest things can make a difference. And as Chris said, this race could come down to a couple points. I mean, Esther only lost by a few points. This could be right on the margins in this race. These are the kind of things we got to avoid if we're going to win a race like that.
Yeah, Collin, I've worked as an attorney and former clerk of the circuit court. I worked with Judge McGraw some time ago on Supreme Court committees. I found him to be affable and well-reasoned and rational and participated great. But if I had heard as a lawyer that even if I got the judgment that I wanted because a judge laid down on the file and ruled in my direction, that would make me really uncomfortable. That's really odd.
And honestly, a little bit nervous about an appeal like that. I mean, it's the kind of thing that, yeah. Anyways, I'll leave it alone. McGraw's on our team, and I don't want to dig any deeper here. Here's all I'll say: I like to be positive best I can, to the chagrin of some of our viewers, including our mutual buddy Finkson, who I always got to give a little bit of a dig to because I love the guy. But he says I'm too positive. But let me say something positive here about the McGraw campaign. Their response. It's too long. It's like 5-6 paragraphs, so I can't read it here. Maybe Lane will bring it up on screen, but again, I don't even know if it'll fit on screen. But the fight they showed in that response, the contrast and how they showed how crazy and how far left Sorensen is and how extreme he is. Like, if that's the fight they show in the final 4.5 or 5.5, 6 weeks of this race, they could win this race. I mean, kudos to them for that statement they put out in response. Again, if Lane can, he'll bring it up on screen in post for those who are watching this. Kudos to the campaign. I want to see that everywhere now. Like, not just in a press release. That should be your entire campaign for the next, let's say, 4 weeks. You got to close positive, and that's fine. But until early voting opens in earnest in let's say, October 21st, 24th, 25th. So until then, for the next 4 weeks, you use that statement, you put that out, that narrative out for the next 4 weeks, and you could bury Sorensen. That was a very good statement. I want to see more of that. All right, let's move to the next one here. House District 79. We talked a little bit about Jackie Haas. Anyone who's watched these podcasts knows I like calling out hypocrisy. And this is one of those situations where I didn't actually have to call out the hypocrisy. It was called out by none other than a left-leaning political blog, which I think is kind of awesome, where Billy Morgan was caught being a hypocrite about the budget. So Craig Wilcox will tell you, and Chris knows this, but he will see it himself personally once he gets down to Springfield. Once the Democrats put up their budget, which is bloated and massive and has tax increases and no Republicans could ever vote for it, once the Republicans vote against it, they then go and put that on mailers and TV ads and say that you voted against rape kits and you voted against this and that, and you hate women and you hate seniors and you hate babies and you want to put guns in schools and blah, 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 because these were tiny line items in a massive, multi-billion-dollar budget. This is their strategy. They've been doing this for 20 plus years. It started under Madigan. So they did this against Jackie Haas because she voted against the budget. She voted against the tax hikes. The problem is their candidate, Billy Morgan, had also already come out and said that he would have voted against the budget. So they're sending mailers out. They're playing a tax out against Jackie Haas for essentially voting against the budget when their own candidate said that he would vote against the budget. And when one of the writers for that blog reached out to Billy Morgan, he even still wasn't willing to say that he would vote for the budget. So even after being caught being a hypocrite and basically lying about his opponent, he was unwilling to step out of his little realm of hypocrisy, which, isn't surprising, but it's definitely worth calling out. Curious if anybody has any thoughts on that. Craig, I know this drives you crazy when the Democrats pull this tactic. So it's kind of nice to see it finally backfire on them a little bit.
Yeah, so this is the same topic as LGDF has been for years, right? The municipalities go to their member in the General Assembly and they get told it's the number one issue. It's top of my list. We've got to get you right with LGDF. And, my counter had been in the past, well, then ask them to vote against the budget. And that's a difficult ask when you're in that majority party. So I've tried asking them to go a different way and say, well, tell me 10 things you won't allow in the budget ahead of LGDF. And then when you find the budget, you see that hypocrisy. It is there through and through. Now, in the credit of some of the Democrat members, they probably honestly believe that way. But in that party, they're not allowed to. I mean, they're not allowed to have that expression when it comes to the budget. So it's either disappointing or it's, as we're seeing here, the ultimate hypocrisy.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it's a missed opportunity. Now, I don't know that we need this in 79. Not everybody agrees, but most people agree that Haas is going to be okay in 79. But honestly, we should have pulled the same tactics Democrats do. I mean, when Billy Morgan came out and said he questioned that budget and would have voted against the budget, I'm wondering where our mailers were that said he would have voted against rape kits for women. He would have voted against breast cancer screening for women. He would have voted to close domestic violence shelters. I mean, they've been doing this for 20 years. I don't know why we didn't copy paste it and say, fine, let's use it against you. I mean, again, this is sort of that guerrilla style tactics we need to start doing if we're going to win in a blue state like Illinois. But I think that was a bit of a missed opportunity. And frankly, we should start using that against some of these Democrats who want to claim like they're fiscally responsible and pretend and play both sides in that budget issue. Whether they vote yes or no, there's an angle to attack them on it. And we got to start to do that.
So Collin, it sounds like you need to bring those courses back that you taught 6-7 years ago, where you remind everybody the percentage of the population that make an emotional decision and it takes years of facts to change their mind versus the smaller percentage that make factual based decisions, but equally can be turned with emotion. We've got a message emotionally, even if that's not the way we think.
Yeah, you're right. And we're thinking about bringing that back post-November because unfortunately, every time we do it, we get complaints from the Republican Party like, that's our job, stay out of our turf. So we go, okay, go ahead, do it. And then a couple years later, they don't do it. So then we do it again out of my pocket, by the way, I pay for it. And then I get more complaints. That's our job. Don't do, okay, fine. I won't touch it. Go ahead. A couple years later, they haven't do it. So I do it again. I think we're at that point in the cycle now, Craig, where I'm going to do it again. Fine. If you're not going to do it, I'll do it. And they'll yell at me. They'll be angry, but somebody's got to do it.
8 years, I've never heard it from the party. So when they yell at you, tell me who.
There you go. All right. I got an ally in this. I like it. All right. This is, Keith, I'll be curious your thoughts on this because I know this is in your district. So we're seeing a lot of reporting the last couple of weeks, which we've been talking about for months now, that in 52, 8 House Republicans have not been stepping in to help Marty McLaughlin. I want to be balanced here, so let me give you the full story here. There's reasons for it. It's not like it's in a vacuum. McLaughlin and McCombie do not get along. It's I don't know. I guess I read somewhere it's more personal, which I would agree with. McLaughlin obviously ran for the position that McCombie currently holds, and the two don't tend to get along pretty well. McLaughlin also doesn't pay HRO dues, which is a big no-no to HRO. So there are reasons why HRO isn't getting involved. That said, Democrats have made 52 one of their top targets. One of the top people they want to knock out is Marty McLaughlin. And Marty needs the help. I mean, again, he's a family friend. We helped him in some of his early races. So I say this out of love, but he ain't running the best of races. And so this is a race where the party kind of does need to step in because we might lose it if we don't get our act together. And HRO is just refusing to step in to help McLaughlin. Again, they have reasons. I'm asking you guys, are those reasons enough? Or should people just be adults and be like, hey, listen, a Republican vote in Springfield is a Republican vote in Springfield. Let's go save the guy. Like, you obviously can tell based on how I worded that question how I feel, but curious if maybe you guys disagree on, hey, if he's not going to get with the program, then we're not going to help him. There's a valid position there, but a Republican seat's a Republican seat. We don't got a lot of those.
Well, you know what? At this point, especially in Illinois, we don't have a majority in anything. We need every Republican vote. And quite frankly, if HRO's job, if their stated mission is to get Republicans elected, then they should be getting Republicans elected, period. That's it. You're going to have a lot of flavors of Republicans around the state. You're going to have a lot of people who disagree or don't get along maybe personally. That shouldn't matter. HRO represents the House and the party. That's it. Marty is valuable. Marty needs to stay. Marty's a good Republican. And if we lose Marty, it sets us back even more. The pile of resources that we control gets smaller and smaller and smaller till the island is so small. Who wants it? And if we only have ourselves to blame by not jumping in to help Marty at this opportunity to help him keep his seat, then shame on us. Shame on the state.
I mean, Keith, we look at Lake County. I mean, we've lost under the previous chairman, we pretty much lost all of Lake County. McLaughlin, I mean, he's one of the few, he doesn't have a lot of Lake County, but he's one of the few Republican reps we have left in Lake County. And we're going to be like, hey, for personal reasons, we're okay if he loses. Like, it seems like a bit short-sighted.
It's pathetic and childish. It really is. I mean, this a game about building back the Republican Party, regardless of flavor of Republican? Let the people in the district decide. HRO and people outside the state, they don't get to vote in that particular race, but they get to support Republicans. They get to support Republicans like Marty McLaughlin to win. And if they're not going to do that, I'm not quite sure what the organization is for, because they're clearly not for Republicans. They're just out for themselves. And they're clearly not out to maintain a majority in the Republican Party, because if we lose Marty, then we're taking a step back even further.
Yeah. Listen, and if anyone wants to be petty and selfish, I could be that person. I mean, we helped Marty get elected as mayor of his town, knocking off a longtime Democrat. Despite getting massively outspent, we helped his slate get elected. But Marty, for his state stuff, has gone a different way, and he's got that right. It's fine. But like most political consultants be like, fine, I'll be petty. I'll say Marty's awful. He's horrible. But he's not. He votes the right way. He's good for our party. It doesn't matter if he works with you or doesn't work with you, or if you like him or you don't like him. Who cares? You got to put aside the personal bullcrap and do what's right for the party, because that's your job. And again, I could be petty and say, fine, Marty's using one of our competitors, screw him. But no, it doesn't matter who he uses. What matters is he's a Republican, and we should be all fighting for the same team right now.
Look, my only comment is I can go a long way on this one, but all I'll say is, wouldn't it be hilarious if, as I predict, the House loses seats and one of them's not Marty McLaughlin? He doesn't go with the program, and he's the guy who holds on. I just think that would be hilarious. I think that should be Marty's goal throughout this entire election. Prove HRO wrong, win your damn race. Do what you can, Marty. We're coming for you.
I mean, that'd be a bad look for McCombie. I mean, the good news is outside groups are coming in to help. We already mentioned AFP. They've been very helpful. I don't know if it's been publicly reported, some of the other groups, so I don't want to name names and get anybody in trouble, but there are outside organizations who are all going to be coming into play here to help Marty out. So other groups are stepping in since HRO won't do it. But again, it's not a good look for Republicans here.
I would just say, we've had similar dynamics, in Southern Illinois, but at the primary level, where there's been contested races and not everybody's on board with each other and things like that. And I would just say that, phones work both directions, and, somebody has to be the bigger person at the end of the day. And, it's up to both sides to decide who that's going to be. But we got to come together and let's win some stuff. And hey, maybe pay your dues. That's always good.
I mean, here, listen, we try to model this good behavior here. I mean, how many of our competitors for core strategies have we had on Smoke-Filled Room? How many races have we promoted that weren't clients? I mean, we promoted some that are clients, of course, too, but like we are one team. At the end of the day, we are all Republicans and we've got to be together regardless of your personal beefs. We've tried to model that good behavior even through this podcast. I really hope it takes hold a little bit more than it has.
And to all kind of finalize it with how short-sighted I think the decision is, because if you don't support one of your own members, what does that say to some of the other members who may end up in a dispute or difference of opinion? And is it members that then start leaving and choose not to pay their dues, or is it just the next step that other members are not supported? And
well, in light of Chris Welsh going after his own members, and now we see the same thing out of HRO. I mean, this is Chris Welsh behavior. And anytime you're emulating Chris Welsh, you should probably take a second and be like, I'm on the wrong path here.
Yep. So, and that's where I think long term you may find implications, whether they'll be tied directly to this decision or not. I'm sure they're in the thought process of any future decision there.
All right, this next topic, I've already made sure to let our guests know. You don't have to talk about this topic, though obviously I'm going to. But there's a reason why we're bringing this up, mostly because there's a mailer that went out that is kind of how Republicans tend to do things. And I'm not intending to whack anybody involved with this mail piece. I'm going to try to keep names off of it, to be honest, because that's not my goal. Lane's going to bring it up on screen here in post, so we won't see it here as we're talking. But you'll see both front and back of this mail piece. And there's a couple things that Republicans always do poorly. And so I'm just using this as an example for our candidates, our staffers, our mail vendors who are watching this, because Democrats tend to lap us on this specifically, which is very clean, targeted messages, not a wall of text. If you see on both sides of this, you see it's basically a wall of text. If you look at the different issues that are brought up, there's immigration, there's cost of living, there's taxes, there's like, if I count 6 different issues, I think 5-6 different issues brought up on one mail piece. It's not visually driven. There's just one photo of Greenwood instead of there being like great visuals like the Democrats like to do that make it emotional, that hammer it home. Again, we've cut off where it was sent from. I'm not trying to attack anybody. I simply want to make this point. 2 points to Republicans. Number one, if you're going to make an attack, you've got to connect the dots for voters, and it has to be clean and it has to be clear. It was the Raging Cajun who said, if I told you 3 things, I told you nothing. And on this mailer, we're telling them 6 things. We're not even telling them 3 things. You've got to make one clean point. It's got to be visual. It's got to be emotional. That's how our attacks have got to be if we're going to win. And that's what the 2 things I wanted to say. One, our messages have to be at a higher level. They've got to have a theme, not just here's all the issues my opponent's bad on. It's got to be my opponent is bad, and then here's some proof. It's a better approach. It's a marketing 101 approach, to be honest, but it's a better approach that Republicans tend to be very bad at. We just list our list of grievances on why our opponents are bad instead of making it clear for the voters, make it clean for the voters. And then don't just do a wall of text. Nobody reads a wall of text. Voters don't care about elections. You get a few seconds on their way from the mailbox to the trash can where they're going to go, throw it away. A wall of text basically means you've wasted that money because they're not going to gather, they're not going to remember anything, they're not going to pull anything out of it before they throw it away. So you've got to be shorter, cleaner, visually driven, emotional, and just connect the dots. Hit one solid issue and connect those dots for them. Ideally, cost of living. This mailer has a lot of taxes and taxes and taxes because, of course, that's usually what we do. But again, make it clean, make it effective. And this is just my plea to Republicans. We tend to be poor in our marketing. We've got to get a heck of a lot better because we're seeing time and time again, Democrats are killing us in the marketing side. They are beating us left and right in the quality of our marketing. And our message is better. Our issues are better. If we could just improve our communications, messaging, and marketing, we're going to win a lot more races. So it's a Collin rant. Forgive me for anyone who doesn't want to cover this topic, but for those who do have thoughts, feel free to jump in.
I think that it's just too much for one mailer, that they could have honed in on some of these things and not had as much content, especially with the size of it. And maybe on the one side, it would have been kind of cool if they would have had, because it says on here that LaToya Greenwood is rolling out the red carpet. Well, they could have, done something visual with that I think would have made it more eye-catching on the one side and probably grab people's attention. And
that's the goal, Michael. I mean, we know in marketing, especially in the age of social media, when people are scrolling through their phones, you have to capture their attention, and marketers say you get 3 seconds. I don't believe you even get 3 seconds. I think you got a second and a half, because people's thumbs are pretty fast. And so the idea is you capture their attention, and then you could tell them more. To be honest, you could design this mailer with the same amount of text, but put the extra text smaller and the headline text bigger to capture their attention, and then they might sit down and read the rest. Like, that's the goal here. We do mailings that do tend to have sometimes a good amount of text, but you've got to have a differentiation in the font size so that, to your point, Michael, you capture their attention and now get them to sit down and give you more than that 1 or 2 or 3 seconds. But when the font sizes don't have enough differentiation, it hits the eyes as too much. I'm moving on.
Yeah. So when it comes to mailers, and I'm obviously, like the rest of you, I'm involved in politics. So these are things I actually look at. But Collin, for a mailer for me, you've got 2 seconds. If there isn't a hook to keep me there, it goes right in the garbage. Look, Collin, I love you, but even your summary of the mailer, quite frankly, was putting me to sleep. If we can't explain the mailer because there's just that much going on, it is a complete catastrophic waste of time and money. It's going right in the garbage.
And the killer is it's a great hit. Like, using the money, we've talked about this. The Senate Republicans, Craig, have done an awesome job at this. I'm sure you've seen it too, Chris, on using the tax dollars that are being wasted on non-citizens. That's a powerful, every time I see that poll, it does extremely well. So they've got the foundation for an awesome message. You just got to do it better. We always say this in politics. Most of the time we get burned not by what we do, but how we do it. There is the foundation here for a killer hit. If you want to drive it home, you got to do it a little bit better.
The only positive side, Collin, is that your listenership here is so far and wide that we're actually giving this particular candidate a lot of press right now just by default.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, certainly our goal is to help. So there you go. We're helping out.
There you go.
All right, let's get off of campaigns. We don't have a ton of time left, but there's a few topics we definitely have to cover that are happening in the state that Republicans need to be aware of. First of which is, Keith, I'm going to start with you here. Unforced errors can kill you in an election season, and you've been having to dig us out of a hole for the last several weeks in Lake County. Both Lake and Northern Cook County Republicans have been dragged into this Mark Robinson drama. Anybody who's followed this in the national news in North Carolina, Mark Robinson, the Republican nominee for governor, said a bunch of dumb things in his life that he's been caught for. I'm not going to repeat it here because my goal is not to drag us into that drama. But he said a lot of dumb things. And unfortunately, I'm going to use names here. Mark Shaw and his split-off organization from the GOP was bringing this guy into Lake County to do a fundraiser for Trump, to then send that money and those people up to Wisconsin. So it's not even to help Republicans in Lake County. It frankly hurts Republicans in Lake County because you're taking resources and bodies out of the county up into Wisconsin. And it was done from the start. But then, of course, the media gets a hold of it, becomes a big controversy. Now Keith and Jim Karras in the 10th, and Mary Cole for state's attorney, and all of our Lake County races, all of our Northern Cook County races, are having to answer for Mark Robinson from North Carolina and all the dumb stuff he said. It was just a really dumb error that frankly has really hurt Republicans in your region, Keith. So I'm going to shut up and let you talk about it.
That's exactly right. I can't imagine what kind of brain trust went into bringing a figure from outside of the district who wasn't even raising money for any candidates or efforts inside the district that they thought would help anyone win elections. Never mind someone who is, even if you believe what he said might be right, even if you believe what he said might be wrong, and of course the more recent comments he really needs to explain because they are just awful. But why would you bring in someone who is even potentially controversial right before voting starts in an area where the Democrats are just going to latch onto it the same way they latch onto every dumb thing coming out of any national Republican's mouth to blame candidates here? So Jim Karras in the 10th is a fantastic candidate, has nothing to do with any of that stuff, but he got painted with it. Mary Cole for state's attorney, Carl Wyckoff for circuit court clerk, and on and on and on. They all got blamed for what was going to happen, not even inside Lake County, but inside the 10th district, to send money outside of the district. This is absolutely a hallmark of Mark Shaw, and he's done it again and again and again, and he just has to go. It's ridiculous. It's an unforced error. And frankly, this is opportunities that we aren't using to help these people campaign to win. We're having to explain away the fact that the Republicans are just not terrible people. And It's awful. And by the way, if Mark Shaw had simply just answered reporters' requests to explain this event, instead of letting them paint the entire Lake County Republican Party and all the candidates with the event, he had no comment, then we wouldn't have had to do anything. He could have said, nope, this is not involved with that. This is a separate matter. It's going for Trump in Wisconsin, whatever else. Instead, he let it sit there in our laps, and we had to play cleanup on aisle 4. And it really is just obnoxious and stupid.
Well, it's worse even than it seems. I think some people have finally picked up on the fact that we actually had to pay. We, as in people involved with the event, so not we. I guess I shouldn't say we, but money had to be paid through Mark Shaw and some others, $50,000 to this candidate to bring him out. So he wasn't even coming out for the goodness of his heart. We were going to give him 50 grand that could have been spent helping Karras and Cole and Ben Grum and some of our Lake County candidates. And then any resources that were raised were going to go up to Wisconsin. So every level of this was hurting local Republicans. And I think your point is good. I didn't even think about that, Keith, but a loyal Republican who cares about the party would have said, hey guys, yeah, this is my event. I'll deal with it. I'll talk to the press. But he left it out. Karras got questions. All these Republican candidates got questions. You had to clean it up, Keith. It was a cluster from start to finish. And these are the things a few weeks out from Election Day, we cannot be doing this crap. We're already coming from behind in a blue state. We got to be smarter than this.
Well, it just shows how unserious these people are. You've got somebody that's running for governor in a swing state, one of the tightest, states in the country. If you look at the polling, North Carolina, he's coming to Illinois to raise money for Trump, but the money that's going to be spent on Trump is going to be spent in Wisconsin. It doesn't even help him get elected. So it's just silly all the way around.
Yeah. All right, we'll move on. I don't want to get anybody else. I'm sure, again, as usual, some people won't like what we're talking about, but the truth's the truth, and we're going to say it. So let's keep moving along here. A couple more issues that we want Republicans. So this section of the podcast is always issues that we think Republicans around the state should be paying attention to because there's some value to them and to their campaigns. And something that is just starting to get attention, but has not gotten anywhere near enough attention because, well, you'll see why in a second, is the problems that you've seen in the Department of Corrections, DCFS. Now it's spilling out into state and Cook County youth detention centers. It's being reported, finally being reported, even though we have mentioned it a few times on podcasts, that since May, there have been lawsuits filed over the fact that 667 children were abused in youth facilities that were run by the state of Illinois and Cook County. This is going back several decades, but it has continued through even Pritzker's administration, and nothing has been done about it. Nothing is being done about it. It's being swept under the rug. Even until recently, the press wasn't even reporting on it because, they're not allowed to say negative things about J.B. Pritzker. But these are serious, serious issues. We're talking about not a couple adults. We're talking about kids, and we're talking about over 600 of them being abused in detention centers being run by our government in the state and in Cook County. That is abhorrent. We have talked ad nauseum about how kids are literally dying because of the failures of DCFS. Here we have kids whose lives are being, for the party that's about criminal justice reform and rehab, and, they want to take these individuals who have made mistakes and help them have a better life. Do you think these 667 kids came out of the detention centers on their path to a better life after being abused by the adults who were supposed to be caring for them at that time? This is awful and gut-wrenching, and it should get more attention, and Republicans need to be calling out any and every Democrat who's not willing to speak up and speak out on behalf of these kids. We talk about needing emotional issues, issues that show we care. This is one of those. The government should be better. I don't care if you're red or blue. This should never happen. And if Pritzker had a backbone, he should stand up and say, this should never happen and I will fix it. But, that won't happen.
As our governor actually said, I will fix it to any of the fiascos in any of his executive agencies. This governor is about national notoriety. He's got a national PAC. He was for a long time angling for a national position. He's not governing. He's not overseeing these executive agencies. And at least in a couple of cases, Veterans Affairs, right? He had to actually go hire a serious candidate because political patronage hires just weren't doing their job. I just learned last night within IDNR, there are members that are political appointees, not even doing work, taking IDNR vehicles out of the state to visit their children at college. If you're going to run for governor, be a goddamn governor and be responsible for your executive agencies. But it obviously isn't happening. It hasn't been happening for 6 years.
Yeah, and it's a culture problem. I mean, we saw with the fraud for PPP and these government employees who are happy to just steal money from taxpayers. This is systemic, and you know what? The buck should stop at the top. And I ask you this: I said this last week when we talked about the Department of Corrections with Terry Bryant. I ask you, all of you now, if there was a Republican governor and this was happening, do you have any doubt that this would lead every newspaper, every TV outlet, that this would be a massive controversy? But we've got a Democrat who might be president one day, according to the media. And so they just want to keep kissing his rear end. And you know what? At a certain point, it's got to matter. Kids being abused, that should matter enough to say, I don't care that he might be president one day. It's time to actually call out our governor. And I'm just waiting for our media to get some sort of a backbone and call this governor out, because the guy has got to take responsibility for something that's happening on his watch. And to your point, Craig, he hasn't yet, so I don't expect it will happen, but a man can dream.
Well, and to use your words, Collin, about a certain left-leaning blog, there's a post yesterday where Rich Miller said that the claims that Illinois Department of Corrections that we talked about last week with Terry Bryant, and she went into great detail that those claims are unsubstantiated. And, there were comments on there saying that, maybe the employees need to be more educated, and that they're having panic attacks when they open the mail and it's not actually, related to drugs or some sort of toxin. It's just laughable. I mean, how do you have 12 people hospitalized at Menard Correctional Facility in Chester? Everybody from inmates to employees to the EMT driver that comes to pick them up. And it's all made up. People just don't want to work anymore. That's got to be the answer.
Well,
don't hold him accountable.
Right. Well, I think, Michael, that's the point, right? It's like as soon as something happens, it's a rush to spin it. Instead of a rush to say, okay, you know what, let's be objective. There might be a problem here. Let's do something about it. But it's always a rush to spin. It's never Pritzker's fault. It's never the Democrats' fault. I wish I wanted to, but we're in campaign season. I didn't have time. I was going to go and check which committees are in charge down in Springfield of oversight or involvement, or, there's always committees that are ahead of everything in this state. Which lawmakers on the Democratic side should be speaking out about this because their committees have jurisdiction? Maybe somebody could do my homework for me and put that out there, because I just didn't have time before this episode. But I'd be asking them, are you okay with this? Are you fine with 667 kids being sexually abused? You're cool with that? Or are you going to speak out about it? All right, Chris is going to get very excited because I never let him talk about the city of Chicago. We're almost out of time, but you know what? We're going to let Chris and whoever else would like to talk about the city of Chicago. So the title for this is, if Brandon Johnson didn't have bad weeks, he'd have no weeks at all. We're going to talk about 3 specific things that have happened recently here with Brandon Johnson that whatever. Let me tell you what we're talking about, because I got no words. First of all, Brandon Johnson is actively trying to oust the Chicago Public Schools CEO. He and CTU and Stacey Davis Gates are trying to get rid of the Chicago Public Schools CEO. And anytime you can unite the Tribune, the Sun-Times, and Crain's all in agreement against you, you've gone a little bit crazy. I mean, especially the Sun-Times. They have now done 2 editorials on why CEO Pedro Martinez should not be fired. The Sun-Times, by the way, is saying this is crazy and don't do this. And yet Brandon Johnson's trying to push him out because he won't do what the CTU wants him to do. He won't actually be fiscally, he's being fiscally responsible, and they don't like that. And so Brandon Johnson's trying to push him out. That's number 1. Number 2, a Brandon Johnson top staffer who he promoted has a history of anti-Semitism and anti-police slurs. He's been called out, and this aide has been called out by not Republicans, though I think some of them have, but by Democrats. Pretty liberal Democrats and progressive Democrats have called out Brandon Johnson and this staffer because she's been a leader of the defund the police movement. She called police effing pigs. I won't say the actual word. She's been accused of anti-Semitism, saying some things that were anti-Semitic, and some of her actions. This is nuts. This is crazy far left. Of course, she came out of a very uber progressive organization, so this is who she is. But Brandon Johnson promoted her, didn't even get rid of her, but promoted her. That's number 2. Number 3, and I'll finally stop. ShotSpotter. We've all followed these issues with ShotSpotter, and Brandon Johnson made a campaign promise that he'd get rid of this, regardless of whether or not it's doing anything good for the city. Who cares? He promised his far left base that he would get rid of it. And so even though the Chicago aldermen voted to keep it, Brandon Johnson has moved to veto that because he has to get rid of it. And wouldn't you know it, there have already been multiple instances of shootings, critically injured, and I think a death, but don't quote me on that. I might have misread it. Were situations where ShotSpotter would have alerted the police, but wasn't available anymore and didn't. In the last week and a half, this is all at Brandon Johnson's feet. I was trying to come up with something to say, like, could this dude move further left? But he probably couldn't. This is awful for Johnson. It's awful for every Democrat who's ever been involved with Brandon Johnson. And frankly, it gives their party a really bad look, which I'm fine with. But this is real bad for Johnson and the Democrats. Jackowiak, will let you start. Then anyone else who wants to jump in, this will be our final topic. Feel free.
You know, the most interesting thing about the Pedro Martinez stuff is you were able to get Pritzker almost on the record saying something very, very negative about Brandon Johnson. Now, everybody knows Pritzker hates Brandon Johnson. That's pretty much an open secret in Illinois politics. Nobody wanted Johnson to be mayor, not even J.B. Pritzker. But Pritzker, like the half answers he was giving to the press, because Pritzker could never give a full answer, were like, well, I think this is really a bad idea, but, you know, he's the mayor of Chicago. He can do what he wants. And it's a smart political maneuver for Pritzker because he wants to separate himself from whatever's happening in the city of Chicago on any given day. And Brandon Johnson allows him to do that. It's like, yeah, well, you know, the mayor's kind of an idiot, but, you know, he's the mayor. He's in charge. It's really funny to see Pritzker do this tiptoe around the tulips with every time that he's asked about Brandon Johnson, because he really, you can tell he really, really wants to just call Brandon Johnson a dunderhead, but he has to stop himself just short because he knows he can't fully do that. But he basically...
you say can't. He can. He's just spineless.
Right, but he's getting close. One day, JB's just going to snap, and we're going to hear what he really thinks about Brandon Johnson, maybe. In any case, they're doing the moderate on the caucus, and some of the moderates in the state right now are doing a really good job calling out Brandon Johnson on the Pedro Martinez stuff. It's really silly considering the city's facing such a big deficit in terms of funding, and these short-term loans at high interest rates aren't going to do anything good. They're just going to dig the city deeper in the hole. So Martinez is right on that front, but you can't upset the CTU here. God forbid the CTU doesn't get one thing they want, everybody. So that's what Brandon Johnson's running in now. And the staffer stuff is just silly. It really shows you how really depraved some of these people in the progressive movement are, and how the patronage is still alive within the progressive movement amongst these progressive organizations. I don't think this woman's ever had a job in her entire life, and yet she's being promoted within the Johnson administration to run. It's like intergovernmental affairs, isn't it, Collin? Like she's supposed to be a lobbyist or something.
Yeah, I mean, her job is supposed to be working with the aldermen, most of which have said we ain't going to work with her.
Right. So it's amazing.
Or is she intergovernmental affairs with the state? I might have gotten that mixed up.
I think she was with the state, which is even funnier considering how bad the relationship is between Johnson and the legislature right now. That she's going to make it even worse.
Have her go into, there's not many of them, but some moderate Democrat's office and see how well that plays.
Yeah, I'm telling you, even some of the liberal Democrats down in Springfield don't want to deal with Johnson anymore. And the third thing with this ShotSpotter, it just doesn't make sense, because the argument is that it's over policing of African American neighborhoods and minority neighborhoods. The problem is that this isn't even they don't even consider this to be policing. Everybody understands ShotSpotter is supposed to, because we understand that there's a policing shortage in Chicago and there's so much crime in the city of Chicago. We understand that when somebody gets shot, you can't get there right away. So it's supposed to be a way to get to the EMS and everybody in there faster. So if somebody's bleeding out in the middle of 63rd and Halstead, you could be like, oh, we could take this person to the hospital and save their lives. But taking away this technology, it handicaps the fire department, handicaps the police department from saving valuable lives. And it's just so stupid that the Johnson administration is dying on this hill that we don't need ShotSpotter. It's interesting, Collin. This is my final point on all this. If you look at the votes for who voted to get rid of ShotSpotter, almost all of them are not in the communities which are most helped by ShotSpotter. They are in the North Shore progressive liberal wards, the gentrification wards. Those are the people who don't want ShotSpotter to stay. And it's a sign of privilege amongst these aldermen that they don't think people need ShotSpotter to save valuable lives in their community. So it's stupid. The mayor of Chicago is an idiot. The progressives on the Chicago City Council are all idiots. And everybody should be, every day Johnson does something stupid, somebody should forward it to Susanna Mendoza or Bill Conway, whoever wants to run for mayor in 2027, to say, here, have this. He's fucking up every day. You have a laundry list worth of things to run on against this guy, because Lord knows this guy's not getting to a second term. He's worse than Lori Lightfoot. We miss Lori Lightfoot. The fact that people are saying those words is amazing. That's the city of Chicago. God help us all.
Yeah, and Craig, just real quick, Craig, I want to throw it to Keith for just a second, and then I know you want to talk about ShotSpotter and anything else. Keith, I don't often have a topic that plays really well into one of our guests, but as a Jewish American, I mean, I got to ask you, the mayor of Chicago promoting and defending a top aide who tweeted, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, amen," and then jeered one of the Jewish members of the council when she was putting forward a resolution. I mean, that's a top aide to Johnson. I've got to imagine for you and many others in the Jewish community, that's a non-starter.
Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, it's anti-Semitic. It's stupid. It's ahistorical. It's just, and I'm seeing it so often. And sadly, from the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, it's becoming more and more acceptable to be loud and proud with this anti-Semitic rhetoric. And then when you get called out, and especially that particular verbiage, oh, that's not what you think it means. Jihad isn't what you think it means. And there's this retconning of all of it. You know what? It's anti-Semitism. And sadly enough, the Democrats own all of it, and if they won't police their own, it should be on them. I just don't think anyone in the Johnson administration or anyone else in Illinois from the Democrat side, as long as they're running things, is going to fix a darn thing. They won't do it with the Johnson administration. They won't do it with Nabila Syed. As far as I know, the 12 of them that didn't recant that document that first came out right after October 7th to cease fire and help Hamas, all of those anti-Semites haven't recanted any of it, and no one has called them out on it. Bob Morgan called out Nabila Syed, the Democrat from up here, for about 5 seconds, so good for him, and then it disappeared. And the document is still there with their signature. It's part and parcel with the progressive wing of the party taking over everything in Illinois.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, I mean, we've had some meetings, we do a lot of work with Arab Americans who are frankly mostly moderate, and they're sick and tired of this BS. I mean, they're sick of being represented by people like Nabila, who are, and Abna Hassan Rashid, who are way far left, when frankly the majority of their community, yes, they've got family and they'd like to see a peaceful resolution to the conflict, and they'd like to see some improvement to the situation for their family members and that they have back home. But this far left crazy rhetoric, they are not on board with, but they're painted as far left because of some of these far left crazies. Craig, I'm sorry. I didn't let you speak. Go ahead, man.
Oh, no worries. You like to have that positive spin on things, right? The fact that our governor really doesn't care much for this mayor and that this mayor keeps digging himself. The positive is it may save the taxpayers of Illinois as a whole $1 billion, because it will be really difficult for Chicago to get a bailout from the state the way things are going. Now,
Fair.
The flip side, the elimination of ShotSpotter, it wasn't but the next morning where Chicago police officers found a critically shot woman on the street corner that they would have been to, and I don't remember if it was tens of minutes or hour plus, that they'd have been to her aid had ShotSpotter still been running. So the bodies are adding up on Brandon Johnson's head. There are ex-posts now. There are aldermen wearing, or at least in possession of, walkie-talkie. The ShotSpotter is nothing but walkie-talkies on a stick. It's a great shirt design. If you haven't seen it, check out Hey Jackass, or I know a place you can get them where they're made. But yeah, we can't even talk about the mayor as the joke of the week anymore, because it'd be all we do every week on this show. So we've got to find something different.
Well, I mean, it's also, to Chris's point, because he likes to point this out, how incompetent Johnson and his administration are. This is the height of incompetence, because you had to know this was going to happen. It's politics 101, that you know that the opponents to you the next day are going to be looking for the very first police call that may or may not have been aided by ShotSpotter. I mean, House of Cards did this as one of their major themes in, was it season 1, season 2, with the teachers, where kids aren't in school. So the first time there's crime that has to do with one of those kids, we're going to do a press conference. I mean, people know this tactic. It's an obvious tactic. And how the Johnson administration didn't think about the fact that the next morning, this is going to be the news. It wasn't going to take more than a day or two for this to happen. It was guaranteed to happen, but they're that inept that they didn't even prepare for it. Weren't even aware of it.
Well, they prepared for it. He announced that he's going to release an RFI to get the next technology. Oh, wait, you're right. Maybe that should have been done when you committed to canceling it, or maybe at the time you extended it for the DNC to protect yourself and your elites. Just a bag of mistakes, or I guess stupidity. We've used that word a few times to describe some of these actions or inactions.
And I think the point for us Republicans as we watch this is, the more they do crazy things like this, the more you need to point it out. We bring these issues up not only to talk about it, but also it's a great contrast in your suburban districts to point to what is happening. And frankly, have your Democratic opponents speak to it. They always hold us responsible. You know, we have to speak about what the crazy stuff the North Carolina Republican candidate for governor said. Why aren't we making Democrats in the suburbs speak to the fact that in many cases, like Nabila Saeed, they hold opinions that agree with crazy far left Brandon Johnson? Let's start to use these tactics to our advantage because they work. All right, we've gone over our time, and I've got to respect everybody's time here in the podcast. So we're going to close with our two final segments. Number one, our fun segment. You don't have to, but you can if you wish. Everyone gets a chance to put in nominations for their OG and Clown of the Week. Anybody you guys want to put in that you think deserves praise from the last week or scorn, now's your chance to do it. Feel free.
The Clown of the Week, my Clown of the Week isn't every week is Brandon Johnson. Like, I got to find a better one. You know, last week I used Byron, which was nice to break it up a little bit. But Johnson in the last week, man, he's the gift that keeps on giving. I mean, the turd that keeps on turning. I don't know, man. Like, it's terrible. Like, God help us. God help the city of Chicago. Brandon Johnson, Clown of the Week.
You're not wrong on that one.
So I'd like to nominate Mark Shaw to be my Clown of the Week with this. Since he wasn't going to win for chair and dropped out of that race, and I took over, he's opened up a 10th congressional district organization, a shadow district to the actual party, and he's been doing things all for himself, culminating, again, without helping any local candidates, as we talked about before, in all of this with Mark Robinson. He's a state central committee member and a precinct committeeman. He's not even helping any of the candidates in Illinois. So it's time for him to not only drop out as the state central committeeman and as a precinct committeeman. If he wants to go to Wisconsin, have at it, man. Bring your joy up to them. But I think at this point, if the Democrat candidates up here in Lake County don't claim him with in-kind contributions to their races for all of the joy that he's bringing to them, then maybe they should be brought before the State Board of Elections.
There you go.
I'll bring up my clown, but Keith probably wins it right there, especially for staying local. I'm going the Biden-Harris foreign policy. Less than 24 hours ago, talking about a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah was imminent. And at the same time, armored forces were moving to the north. And then, Netanyahu's getting on the plane to come to the UN. The minute that plane goes wheels up, a U.S.-France statement on what we're going to do for a ceasefire, and then wave after wave of airstrikes all day today. Our administration either is incompetent or is fantastically out of touch with where they're trying to position the U.S. And where's our military advisors in all of this? I guess holding on to their job by keeping their mouths shut.
Yeah, fair. I've got two clowns and two OGs. If anybody else has thoughts, I'll give mine real quick. Two OGs. Number one, you know what? I give kudos to Pedro Martinez, the Chicago Public Schools CEO, for saying, yeah, I'm not stepping down. You want me out of here, you got to fire me. I think that's a pretty OG move. So that's one of mine. And you know what? Up by you, Keith, Jim Karras. This is a guy who, when he got into this race, he knew the 10th was not on anybody's radar. The 10th was not in play. Many people had conversations with him that said, your odds of winning are like, 0.000 something percent. And Jim said, I don't care. I'm going to run a good race. I'm going to get out there. I'm going to talk the issues. I'm going to hold Schneider accountable. They've run a good race. They put the message out there. Do we win the 10th? No disrespect to Karras. He knows this. Probably not. The fact that he has run a great race, he's put a lot of money into it. He's put a lot of effort into it. We've not had a serious candidate in the 10th district in a long time. And so kudos to Jim Karras, his wife, who are both wonderful people. Kudos to them for stepping out and doing this for the party. I love it. I got two clowns. One is hyper local. the Hanover Park District Board President Mark Elkins, a couple weeks ago, rushed out onto the field during a soccer game between the Hanover Park and Streamwood Park districts to yell at and scream at a referee for not giving a foul call. Literally on the field, pointing at him, screaming at him. But here's the kicker. The referee was a 17-year-old kid. This is a park district function. A 17-year-old kid is referee, and the park district president, Democrat, by the way, but that doesn't really matter, rushes out into the field to scream at him and point at him, but the 17-year-old kid absolutely deserves a Clown of the Week nomination. There's more to the story on some of the dumb things that he's said and done since then. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll just leave it at that. My last Clown of the Week, you know it's coming, J.B. Pritzker, to the Martinez situation. In the past, J.B. Pritzker actually did come out and say he didn't think Martinez should go. But now that the CTU and now that Brandon Johnson have officially said that Martinez should go, Pritzker didn't have the backbone, I'll say it, he didn't have the balls to stand by his original position and say, I disagree with that. To Chris's point, he waffled, he's used extra words, trying to make it seem like he wasn't calling it out. Once again, showing that our governor doesn't have the guts to stand up for what's right, even when everybody knows what's right, he still won't stand up for it. That deserves a Clown of the Week nomination. We get everybody's.
I was going to give my Clown of the Week nomination to Rich Miller for calling the crisis at Illinois Department of Corrections unsubstantiated. And I think he needs to give Terry Bryan a call if he wants the facts.
All right.
I think his readers would appreciate that.
After he quoted you, now you're like, now you're on the warpath, aren't you?
Yes.
I like it. I like it. Yeah, and to be fair, sometimes Rich has done good things. I mentioned they called out the Billy Morgan situation where he's a hypocrite. So sometimes he does things that he should, but I think Michael's calling you out a little bit here. So we'll see where that goes. All right, final thoughts. We've gotten people in enough trouble this week, but we've done a lot of good. And frankly, I think we've drawn attention to a lot of important issues. So I appreciate everybody being with us this week. All of you brought the heat. So I don't know really where to go with this. We'll let our guests go last. So we'll let Chris and Michael give their closing thoughts first. Chris, you're not muted, so you get to go first.
Fantastic. I really don't get anything much political to say. The White Sox won today, which you watch this tomorrow. You already know that, which means for whatever reason, we may never lose again. We may never, after a year of, insufferable baseball, where it was a given that we were going to break this record for like how many losses, we just swept the Angels. Like we're just not going to break the record, and this whole season will be for naught. I'm floored by this, Collin. I'm sorry. I know this is a political podcast. We want to talk about politics, but how the White Sox, they suck so bad they can't even lose when we want them to lose. This is insane. Again, the White Sox are the Illinois Republican Party of baseball teams. They just, everywhere you go, they just disappoint you left and right, man. I'm telling you.
Chris is letting out the fire. I like it. Michael, closing thoughts.
Hey, what did Chris say? 39 days to go, and you watch this episode. So let's get out there and make it happen. A lot of competitive races. We've been talking about them, all year, and now's when it really counts.
All right. All of our guests brought the heat. I'll just go through you guys. Keith, why don't you start us off here? Closing thoughts.
Now's the time. It's not even about party. It's about getting candidates elected. And don't forget about municipal elections. We are now circulating petitions. That's where we have to develop our farm team. Whenever there's an issue with schools or local townships or municipalities, we can only blame ourselves if we don't get great candidates out there and get them elected. And now, just like you said, Collin, people like Jim Karras and others, great people running because they really believe in wonderful things for this country. It's our turn to get them elected.
I like it. Great message. Chris Balkema, thanks so much for being here with us. I can't wait till I can start saying State Senator Chris Balkema. Closing thoughts from you, my friend.
I appreciate the opportunity. There's 13 million people here in Illinois, and I'm looking forward to doing anything I can do to help. The 53rd district is a district that I love. There's a lot of good folks in there, and at the state level, if you just extrapolate that, everybody has the same needs and wants, and I'm looking forward to bringing the moving trucks back and having them to stop just going one direction from a financial perspective. So I appreciate the connections and look forward to continue to work with each of you.
Yeah, those of you who are on the state who don't yet know Chris Balkema, he's going to be a huge asset for Republicans down in Springfield. Business acumen and proven fiscal conservative, definitely something we need down in Springfield. So check Chris out. Senator Wilcox, you get our final word today. Your closing thoughts.
Sure. For Chris, I think I can safely say you're going to get your record. I think their next 3 games are against the Tigers, who need at least 1 win to ensure their playoff spot, I think. So it's likely coming your way. But to all those that are out there listening, make your plan now for when you're going to go vote, and make sure you have a plan to take family, take coworker, take some neighbors, and go get it done. And if your plan is election day, make sure you have backup plans, depending on weather or anything else that comes up, family situations. So let's go bank those votes and let our candidates know they've got a good number of them already into the clerk's offices.
I'm going to piggyback off that because that's my closing thought too, which is we got to get those votes in. Early voting has started now officially in most counties. It's usually at an inconvenient location. So if you're not going to do it yet, that's okay. October 21st is when they start in all the different townships and municipalities, and it's more convenient. Research has shown Republicans who are reticent to vote by mail are willing to do it early if they can touch it, which means in person early. So Craig, to your point, if you have to do it on election day, fine, but please, for 15 days before election day, you can go to a convenient location, you can touch your ballot, you can put it in the machine yourself. It's safe, it's okay to do that. You don't have to wait till election day. Don't make Republicans around the state have to campaign to you those final 15 days. Bank your vote, get it in. We need you to get your votes in if we're going to win. With that, we'll close down. Thank you to our participants this week. You guys have been awesome. Thanks to our viewers who have stuck with us. These episodes are getting longer as we're in election season, but thank you for being with us. We'll be back next week. And by the way, thanks to Lane Davis, our producer. I can't forget that. We'll be back in your inboxes next week on the Smoke-Filled Room.